Adwaita, it's an absolute honor to host you. And for those of you who don't know her, I'll just give you a brief introduction. So, Adwaita has completed her education from the Harvard Business School and then worked at Bain for a while before joining her mother in her entrepreneurial journey with Nykaa. She has been listed in Fortune 40 Under 40 and ET 40 Under 40 in 2022. A great inspiration for all of us, she has played a pivotal role in making Nykaa a household name and a trusted brand in India. As we move ahead with the session, we will learn more about her journey and her experiences. I promise all of you that this session will definitely be of great help to all of you. I would now like Adwaita Ma'am to take over.
Sure. Really happy to be here. I think it's lovely to meet all of you virtually, and I enjoy doing these conversations because I remember that when I was in college, it was always in some of these conversations that I got inspired. I started thinking about myself, my career differently. So if I can play even a small role in that journey for you all, it's my pleasure.
Oh, that's so great. So, ma'am, we have a few questions for you, and in the end, we'll open the questions for the audience. So, let's start. So, ma'am, my first question to you is about education's journey in Harvard and Yale. Like, what all experiences you had there? Can you please share with us and the learnings you took from there that still resonate with you as you work in the industry?
Yeah. So I think, just this context for you guys, I was always a really academic student. So even in high school, I was always, the nerd. I always loved studying. And I always wanted to make sure that I went to one of, a great college. So quite early on, I had my eyes on some of the Ivy Leagues, and Yale in particular was something that had sort of captured my imagination. Sitting in India, I don't think we even know these schools. Sometimes we just read about these schools, we get excited. So I have to say it was not a very well-researched choice, but started working towards that and finally ended up going there. At Yale, I started off as an economics major, but very quickly I realized that when I looked around, everyone was studying economics, and I thought that how can I be different? And so even at that age of 18, I was always thinking that I think the way to succeed or to challenge yourself is to do something different, to do something challenging. So that's when I actually switched from my economics major to an applied mathematics major in my first or end of first year. And it was just this inkling that I want to do something really difficult. I want to do something challenging, something that others are not doing. I want to take the path less taken. And that's how I started with the math major. I think the math major was really difficult. It's not that I was, this out of the box math, genius. I was absolutely not. I found the classes very challenging initially, but I was very hardworking. And so again, just through sheer hard work, I ended up succeeding really well in the major, ranking quite highly in my class. And so that whole experience of taking a very difficult subject that I wasn't inherently necessarily the best at, but being able to succeed through hard work, just sheer hard work, is something that has carried with me, since then in a very big way. So that's one big lesson I got from Yale, was one, that hard work can really help you through life, and hard work can help you take on and solve even sort of the most challenging problems. I think another thing I'm really grateful for is actually the math major has been really helpful. Obviously now I sell beauty and fashion, so you might think that is the math major helpful. I think it's really helpful actually. The way math makes you think, makes you structure problems. Numbers are really important in any aspect of running a business. So I think it also shifted the way like my brain worked a little bit. So I enjoyed that major a lot. Actually, while I was at Yale itself, I applied to Harvard for, they have a 2+2 program, which is when you're an undergrad, you can apply, and then they give you 2 years to go do whatever you want, and then you can come to the business school after 2 years. And so I got in when I was, again, in college. So that is actually the reason I had the freedom and flexibility to come back to India when my mom was starting Nykaa, to join her, because I was sort of like, if Nykaa also doesn't work out, I can always go to HBS because I had that in my pocket. So I think a little bit of forward planning helped me get a lot of flexibility and freedom. So then moving on to Harvard, I actually was with Nykaa for 2 years, and then I went to Harvard after 2 years. I was actually with Nykaa for 3 years. I delayed for a year, then went to Harvard for 2 years. I loved the Harvard experience. I really recommend MBAs. People now say MBAs are going out of fashion, but I don't think so. I think an MBA really, really helps. What did I love about Harvard? I think the case method. So they teach via cases. They don't teach via textbooks. So every day you have to study like 5 or 6 cases, and it's a company. It's an episode in a company's life, and you have to pretend that you're the protagonist dealing with that. And so I think that's a great way to read about so many businesses and the challenges that they face. So I think it develops like muscle memory for you in terms of even today at Nykaa, I sometimes think back, oh, remember that case we looked at where XYZ CEO was struggling with this, and XYZ marketing head was struggling with pricing, and XYZ was struggling with competition. So I think business tends to have a lot of repetition, and the case method allows you to see that. So I would say I learned a lot actually at Harvard, and I became better at my job because of the MBA.
That's amazing. I mean, it really proves that how your hard work paved your way to this entrepreneurial journey. So, like, were you always interested in becoming the entrepreneur? Because you chose to be a math major. You chose a math major and then you shifted to matlab, business side. So,
Yeah, no, I never dreamt of being an entrepreneur. I think growing up, my parents were both in finance, so they worked in banks and investment banks, and so I actually grew up thinking that maybe I would become I would go into finance, whether it was banking, trading, private equity, venture capital, consulting. These were the types of fields I was looking at. Um, so entrepreneurship was never part of the plan. I think if you met the 18-year-old me, even the 22-year-old me, I would have been saying, oh, I'll go to New York City and join one of these finance companies. But entrepreneurship just sort of happened. And I think it was the biggest blessing in my life that I stumbled onto Nykaa and got to experience it, because entrepreneurship is absolutely a beautiful journey. The amount you get to pour your heart and soul into your work, there's no difference between work and life. Like it's amazing to have something where you can just care so much about what you're doing. It's amazing to be able to build things from scratch. It's amazing to be able to learn so much on the job. The learning curve is so accelerated. The people management, leadership, team management, these also really accelerated skills that you get. So I would say I'm an accidental entrepreneur, but I'm really grateful that I stumbled upon it, because there's not a day in the last 10, 11 years of being at Nykaa that I've been bored. I've every morning jumped out of bed, sometimes struck with anxiety, but still jumped out of bed to go to work. So I think caring about what you do and being able to enjoy it is a real blessing.
yeah, that's true. And so, moving on these lines itself, so I just wanted to ask, so you had a very traditional career path. You had a good job at Bain, and then you left it for a startup because Nykaa had just started back then. So, what gave you that confidence?
So honestly, I think I was 21, 22, just graduated. My mom was like, hey, let's do something interesting, let's start something. I was like, okay, like why not? I had nothing to lose. And like I told you, I already had that admission in my back pocket. So if anything were to go wrong, I could have always gone and reset my career. So if I'm really honest, it was just that I had a bit of a insurance policy that if anything went wrong, I could go set my career again. I'm not sure I would have taken the risk if I hadn't had the business school admission from then. Um, and I mean, later in this talk, we can talk about how difficult those first few years of Nykaa were. But
Yeah.
yeah.
That's so now we talk about your entrepreneurial journey with Nykaa. So how did Nykaa start? So according to me, every successful startup addresses a gap that exists in the industry. So what was it, and how did you guys identify it?
Yeah, so I think the story of Nykaa, starts with my mom, Falguni Nayar. She was an investment banker for 20 years plus, and when she turned 50, she said, "Both my kids are done with their education. Now I want to take a risk and I want to do something different." So she said, "I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to build a company." Um, and that's around then is when I started, joining her, and we studied a lot of companies. And it wasn't that we were passionate about beauty. In fact, we always joke that in our house there was one lipstick between two of us. Like we didn't even have beauty products. So it wasn't that it came from a passion of beauty. It's just that we studied a lot of businesses and we realized that beauty was a great business. It has a lot of inherent properties that make for a very successful business. We read a lot of research reports that spoke about beauty. So beauty itself is a very exciting industry for many different reasons. The other thing was we felt that, the big guys at that time, Flipkart and all, were already there. And even the big industrialists in India, they would not focus on beauty. We'd say, okay, they'll probably do electronics first, they'll do fashion, they'll do furniture, they'll do books, they'll do food, they'll do grocery, but who's thinking about beauty, right? So it was also that. And then lastly, we liked the idea of e-commerce because we didn't have some immense savings. So we felt that e-commerce was a cost-effective way to get started. Yeah, so I think it was kind of like we pieced together the fact that this was an industry ripe for a business rather than being customers who really felt the gap. So the only reason I say that is because I think for anyone who's thinking about entrepreneurship, I think there are two ways that you can get to an entrepreneurial idea. One is either you've experienced something or you're very passionate about it and you spot the gap. We were not that. Another way is you can research and find a really interesting idea that you want to solve, and through like business principles and first principle thinking, you can try to solve that. And I think we fall into the latter camp.
Yeah, correct. Okay, so what do you think that sets Nykaa apart? I mean, as you mentioned that they've already Flipkart and all, they already existed. So e-commerce was already there. So apart from beauty, like you started fashion also. So how did you enter into this saturated market, and what was your strategy, your marketing strategy to go forward?
So first and foremost, I feel that you have to start with just the basic principles, which is that these markets are really, really large. Like the Indian fashion industry is going to be $125 billion by 2025. Beauty will probably be like 30 billion by 2025. So first of all, they're massive industries. No one player can take the whole market. So even if there were players in these spaces, like in fashion, there are players who are already there. I definitely believe that there is room for at least 3 or 4 players to exist. And in general, we're really bullish about the Indian consumer story and the growth that India will see, right? India is still really, really early in its consumption journey. If you look at all sorts of charts that we get our hands on, we can see that India is still like decades behind some of these, the US, the UK, China, in terms of consumption. So India's consumption, and all of us, young people and you all as students, how much more we are going to consume than our parents did is just a reality. So in general, we're bullish about consumption. We're bullish about the demographics. We're bullish about the size of these industries. So when the overall macroeconomics are pretty good, I don't think one needs to worry so much about who's the competition and is there space for more people. I think like I'm a big believer that multiple people can exist in the same space. Now, within that, I think it's important to have a differentiation and a distinctiveness. So when all of y'all think of Nykaa and you think, why should I buy my beauty products on Nykaa? Why should I buy my fashion on Nykaa Fashion? I hope, at least for those of you who are consumers, the distinctiveness is clear. So you buy it on Nykaa because it's trustworthy, because it has brands that you can't find anywhere else. You buy on Nykaa Fashion because it's more curated. You buy there because it's more occasion-led. It's less massy. So, I mean, whatever the descriptors are, I think the brand needs to stand for something distinct in a market where there are other players.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. And moving on, so before starting Nykaa Fashion, and what was your experience as a co-founder? Like, what was your role before starting Nykaa Fashion?
Yeah. So, like I said, I actually joined my mom about 6, 8 months after she started the company, and so it was super early days. This was back in 2013. Um, there was nothing. I remember being in our bedroom sketching out what the website should look like and saying, okay, let's have a menu which says makeup and skincare and hair care, and let's have a section which says, editors picks, and just thinking round up. And I think that's the most fun period, right? When you're just dreaming up what this product will look like. Then there's the whole journey of going and pitching to brands, convincing L'Oreal, convincing Estee Lauder Group, come sell on our platform. Some of those, like Estee Lauder, took us 3 years to convince them to come onto our platform. The early years were actually really, really difficult, and I love talking about this. In fact, in any talk I give, I typically talk about how difficult the first 2, 3 years were.
Yeah.
There was no, I mean, Nykaa, as all of you see it today, which is this like, poster child of Indian startups, that was just not what it was. I think for so many years, we struggled to get to like even 100 orders a day, right? And today we're comfortably over, 1.5 lakh orders a day. But it took many years to get to 100 orders a day. I remember we would just look at our phone and saying, okay, today we hit 20 orders, today we hit 30 orders. So scale took some time to come. Then we used to go to investors, we used to raise money. I think we must have spoken to over 50, 60 investors who all declined, saying, we don't think beauty is a big enough market. Where is your technical co-founder? They saw gaps in the execution. That was, again, difficult. For sure. And when a business is struggling, as we were for those first 3 years, right? Like fighting for 30 orders a day, back-end systems breaking down, not being able to deliver orders, customer service going out of control. When times are tough, it's actually really hard to build and keep a motivated team. So culture in the company was struggling, and therefore attrition was really high. There were days when we used to have 2-3 people quitting a day. In our first 6 months, we probably lost all our, management team. So it was a very difficult time. And for me personally, I found it very hard to deal with the stress and the anxiety. Like you end up becoming so attached to the highs and lows of your company that, and I was also again really young at that time. I was like just 22, 23. I'd not really worked anywhere. I hadn't seen that highs and lows are the truth of business. All business has it. I hadn't seen all of that. So I know that when people used to quit, I used to get so upset. When suddenly after 2 weeks of good sales, the sales would dip, I would get so upset. I couldn't even talk to my friends. I couldn't engage with them on anything. I couldn't find work-life balance. I was up all night trying to work, trying to figure things out. I used to get quite burnt out. And so that is the underbelly of entrepreneurship. It's a really, really difficult journey when you first get started. Like even now, my husband is starting a company, and it's like the first few years are so difficult. Watching someone you love also do it is challenging because you have to work so hard. Most people don't believe in you, and yeah, you just have to be absolutely relentless, really thick-skinned. And I think if you do it for enough years and you do it relentlessly enough, it typically ends up working out. But the first few years are very difficult. So your question was, what was my role? And I think I went on a different tangent. But my role was sort of, I did all sorts of things, everything from looking at the product, the technology, the app, to onboarding. I think in early stage companies, and when you're an early stage employee and person, part of the team, you end up doing many, many different things. You hop around a lot.
And like you mentioned, so the early years were difficult. So how did you maintain the culture? I mean, you said yourself that people were quitting and it was so difficult. And I guess that when you're so invested in a company, matlab it's your company, so you take it personally also, like if someone quits. So how did you maintain that culture? How did that leadership emerge in you to take it forward and motivate everyone that, this is what we have?
So I feel, yeah, I would say that, how does one answer this question? I think, I would say probably like 3 aspects to it. The first is that you have to just accept that when times are tough, it is very hard to have a happy-go-lucky team. When you're hyping your company and you're on the front line of every newspaper, everyone is proud to work there and there is no attrition. But when you are starting from scratch, I mean, rightfully so, right? If you join Nykaa in the first 2 years and you're like, where are the orders? Why are we working in this dingy office where there's leakage from the corner? You're like, please, thank you. I'm going to another company. So I think like just accepting that early stage is difficult and that you may not be able to do everything you want for your people and they may choose to leave you, and that's okay. Just accept it. It's a little bit out of your control. The early turmoil is a little bit out of your control. I think the second aspect that emerges in early stage leadership is that you have to bring your best self every day to work. So as a leader, if I'm so affected that all these people have quit and the orders are not coming and everything's crumbling, but if I show up to work with the 10 of you that are left working for me, that being grumpy, being angry, snapping, not having a cool head, not being clear in terms of my thought process, then it's even worse, right? Y'all will also leave. So I think like making sure that you're able to bring your best possible self to work every day in those difficult times, working on yourself so that whatever drama you have, your stress, your anxiety, you leave it at home. But when you come to your team, you're the best possible version of yourself is a really important aspect of leadership. Very important then, important today also when the company is much larger. So I do a lot of things to take care of myself so that when I come to office, I'm really in my best shape. So whether it's like meditation, journaling, exercise, spending time with friends, all these other things that give you peace, give you clarity, give you stability, you must do. And so now I would hope that when I go to office, most of the people who work for me say that I very rarely lose my cool. There's a lot going on, but I'm typically quite calm and balanced. And I think that's important. So that's probably the second tip is that you need to be the buffer of stress. You can't pass your stress on to the teams. You have to protect them from it. And then I think the third principle that emerges is like you have to be a relentless optimist. So I think like your team works for you because they are infected by your energy, by your passion. I believe in this idea. I believe in you. We can do it. Optimism, optimism, optimism. Because, I mean, entrepreneurship, the odds are so stacked against you. And there's so many people saying, no, you can't do it. But if the leader's also wondering that can we not do it, then I don't think people want to work for someone like that. So optimism is probably the
Yeah,
third key aspect.
so true. And I think that this thing was really important for all the young entrepreneurs sitting here in this talk. Moving further, I wanted to ask that how was Nykaa Fashion born?
Yeah.
Like, it was born in 2018, which is much later after you established yourself in cosmetics.
Mhm. Yeah.
So,
So Nykaa Fashion was born in, like you said, 2018. I started to, look at it by early 2019. If I honestly tell you, it again starts with my mom, who's like this relentless risk taker. She loves taking risks. So by 2017, 2018, the beauty business, it had been about 6 years. It was in a much better place. She started saying, that what do we do next? Like, we have to make sure we're adding enough growth engines for the future. Why not fashion? And I again was like, no, like absolutely no. I don't want to get into fashion. Like Myntra is a very big player. How will we ever compete? All this, the typical
right.
stressors that you guys would think of. I was also a naysayer. I was like, let's not do it. We've got a lot to do in beauty. Let's focus. We're opening beauty stores. We're opening private labels. Um, let's just stay focused on beauty. But she said, no, just go explore. And she kind of pushed me and nudged me in that direction. And I do think that her gut feeling was right. So after 6, 7 months of looking at the fashion space, I realized that yes, there are these players, but it goes back to one of my earlier principles. The market is massive. So if Nykaa can set up a decent fashion business, it doesn't have to be the biggest player in the market. 5, 6 years from now, it can be a really valuable size, right? Like, so if you just do the math, if fashion is $125 billion by 2025, if online is 20% of that, and if Nykaa is even able to get 5% of the online pie, not even more than that, this is like a billion, $2 billion business. So it's a very valuable, large business if you can get even a sliver. So like I said, that's what struck me. Yeah. And then again, I think one thing that struck me is when I looked at the landscape, I felt that the players like Myntra and Ajio were very focused on price and discount, and there was an ability for a slight premiumization. There was a player who could come and sell slightly more premium. So not taking it to the, Purnia's pop-up, Azan, some none of that, but just slightly more premium than Myntra. I felt that there was a gap and there's an opening, and that's what we've tried to stay focused on.
That's nice. So that's how you created your USP, that slightly premium product, and
Yeah,
you focus on, right. That's great.
correct.
So one more question of mine was that fashion and cosmetics, they attract youth the most, and as we know that, is there an echo in my voice? No, right? Okay, so I was oh yeah. Yeah, so I was asking that fashion and cosmetics attract youth the most. So, with so many fluctuation in their taste and preferences, how do you manage to keep Nykaa interesting for them?
So I think I think it's important to understand what every generation sort of values and where the tastes and preferences are headed. So I think as a company, really making sure that we have our pulse on what our audiences are thinking and caring about is really important. So I think that is a very important part of building a good brand, is making sure you're saying what the woman wants to hear. And actually, it came quite easy to us because both me and my mom were women. We are women, and we're both of different age groups, right? So I was younger. I was in my early 20s when we started, and she was in her early 50s. So we both kind of had a pulse on what our generations and our peers were thinking and talking about. So I think that, combined with the fact now in our team we have a lot of women who are now even younger than me. Right now I'm in my 30s, so now we have other 20-year-olds who bring that flavor. So I think it's really important to make sure your teams have that diversity, enough 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds, enough women, enough men. So you're being able to get a grip on kind of what the consumer is feeling and thinking. And then you weave that into all your marketing and communication and all of that.
Okay, and moving on these lines only, how do you define fashion today? What are your opinions on the fashion industry as a whole? Like, can you elaborate on that?
I think I lost your voice for a few minutes. Can you just repeat the question?
Oh. Yeah, yeah. So I was asking that on these lines itself, how do you define fashion today? And what are your opinions on the fashion industry as a whole?
So, I think that's a tough question. I think there's a lot going on in fashion, of course. So on one hand, you have, the luxury brands. Again, they're doing better than they ever have. If you read like an LVMH's earnings, if you see kind of just the dynamicism in that whole super luxury space, there's a lot going on there. But then also you have a lot of movement on the absolutely lowest side of price points as well. You have, Shein and all of that doing extremely well. You have people who are talking sustainability, but then you have the same people who are buying tons of fast fashion. So there's I would say there's a lot of different forces at play. There's luxury, there's mass, there's sustainability, there's fast fashion. There's the emergence of like local talent. There's a lot of local Indian design talent coming up, which is quite interesting. So I would say, yeah, there's probably a lot going on. Um, I think one thing that is bad about the fashion industry is the sheer amount of discounting. I think like because we play in beauty and we play in fashion, we know that fashion discounts are insane. And the market has sort of been ruined by some of these other players in the market. Um, so all these brands are selling their products at 40, 50% off. That is so much value that is being lost in the supply chain. So I think discounts is the worst thing that can happen to an industry. And unfortunately, I think fashion is quite plagued by crazy discounts. Customers are benefiting, but it's hurting every other aspect of the supply chain, everyone from the manufacturers to the people working in the workshops to retailers. Everyone else is struggling because when you give away 40% as a form of a discount, there's really nothing left to make the
For
whole
the
kind of ecosystem work.
right. Okay. So as you talked about sustainable fashion, so can you explain our audience what sustainable fashion is? And do you think that sustainability and profitability go hand in hand? And if so, how?
So I think the word sustainable is really loaded, and I don't think anyone can really define what it truly means. I mean, sustainability can have many meanings. It can be the materials that they used. Are they lighter on the environment than other materials? It can be who made it. Is it a local craftsman or is it being made in you know, bad conditions out of Bangladesh? It can be the pace of consumption, so slow fashion versus fast fashion. So sustainability has many different pieces to it, and it's not like there's no perfect measurement of whether something is 100% sustainable or not, because there are many elements. My personal view on it is that truly the most sustainable thing anyone can do is actually to consume less or to like consume very little. The most sensible thing you can do if you truly, truly want to be sustainable and great for the environment is buy one pair of jeans every like 5 years. It's, buy just a handful of t-shirts, reuse your siblings, like truly not buying is the most sensible thing you can do. So I find it a bit odd when fashion brands talk about sustainability, because fundamentally, if you're encouraging people to buy, it's really not the most sustainable thing. My personal view is, so therefore, I think Nykaa Fashion, all we can do is explain. We can explain how products are being made. We can explain the impact on the environment, but people can make their own choices.
Okay, okay. Correct. So,
Nidhi, are you there?
like, as you said, that you, um,
Yeah,
hello?
we can hear you now. Yeah, we can
Yeah.
hear you.
Is it an unstable connection from my end?
I think it's a little bit unstable. It's not been terrible, but I'll let others chime in.
Um, Kush, can you like hear me?
Yes, you are
Nice.
audible, just the video is slightly blurred.
We can manage with
Oh,
that.
hello. Am I audible? Yeah. In the meantime, ma'am, can I ask you a question?
Or
Sure.
Yeah, you said that there are two ways an entrepreneur can approach developing a startup. So one way, as you said, was if you have a passion for something and you approach it, and the other way that you took was by doing some research, relevant research.
Hmm.
So were there any other opportunities that you researched, or were there any other fields apart from fashion and cosmetics that you researched for before
Yeah.
starting Nykaa?
So, yeah, I think my mom always says that there were two other spaces that really appealed to her. One was around old age solutions, because I think everyone knows that, the demographics, both in India and globally, are heading to a place where old age products and services are going to become really important. So I think that's one. And I think another idea was actually like the Airbnb idea, which is, can we create Indian homes as like rentals and in remote parts of India and things like that. So those were the two other ideas that were toyed with. I think the latter, that's there's too much stress on the services, right? Like if anything goes wrong in a homestay, you don't want to take responsibility for that. But and personally, an idea I love and I've been toying around with is something in the space of emergency medical care. So I think like in India, it's if you do the research, I'm scared to give this idea out because then any of y'all can start it. But one of my dream ideas that I'd love to do one day is something around ambulances. There aren't enough ambulances in the country. There aren't enough paramedics. It's actually very hard to get emergency care in this country. So I think there's disruption pending in the emergency medical care space as well.
Yeah, I believe the problem actually surfaced during the COVID pandemic. We actually were able to observe how much of a emergency
Shortage it is. Yeah,
there
yeah,
is.
absolutely.
Yeah, that's actually a great idea. I hope
Yes.
no one steals it. Yeah.
nice. I guess Satvik. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're back. You're back fully, so you can
Yeah.
continue.
I think that you answered. You gave out a great idea for the startup. So
Hmm.
we were talking about sustainable fashion and the profitability, and you explained it so well. So another question of mine was that Nykaa's first thing was that it had to bring good cosmetic brands to India at low cost. So, can you explain the whole supply chain logistics and how do you ensure the originality in the products?
Yeah, so I think in terms of the authenticity, we only source from the brands directly. So
Okay,
if we're giving you a Huda palette or a Huda lipstick, it's coming from Huda, the brand
okay,
in Dubai. So that's a big fundamental difference than some of the other players in the market. All these products are available in the gray market. They're available via intermediaries, middlemen. We never work with any of them. So we work with just the brand itself or their authorized distributor for the country. So actually, this was a choice in the early days of Nykaa. There were a lot of brands we couldn't win. And but they were available via distributors and in the gray market. But we took the call that we will never do that, even if it means we grow slower, because we want the customer to always know that when they go to Nykaa, 100% guarantee of authenticity, and it's the right product. I think some of us are scared to go into the bigger platforms because you don't know whether what you're getting is spurious or not. But your first question was, how do we handle the supply chain? So a lot of, I would say like 80% of the brands are already in India. So they already have their India set up. They do the import registration. They bring it into the country. And then there's 20% of brands that we have gone abroad. We've convinced them enter India, and then we do their import registration and bring them into the country.
Okay.
It's not a very difficult supply chain, yeah.
So if you have brands like Charlotte Tilbury, and you talk about Huda. So do you already have an inventory in India? Like, do you order everything beforehand? Because you don't know like what all will sell.
So yeah, we buy and hold and keep inventory for everything. So whether it's an international brand like Charlotte Tilbury or Huda, whether it's a local brand that has India presence like a MAC or a Bobbi Brown or like a L'Oreal, Maybelline, everything, we predict how much we'll sell and we buy it and we keep it in our warehouse. We have 14, 15 warehouses, and then we ship. And that's why a lot of y'all would love Nykaa's delivery, because it happens quite instantly.
Yeah, Pilani delivers in 2 days. So
Oh, good,
it's
good. That's great. But yeah, I mean, I think like inventory, like what your question, which is that inventory can be risky. So if you see like a lot of brands and retailers, one of the things that can go wrong is that they bought the wrong inventory and then they have to take write-offs. So having a very smart analytical team managing your inventory. So most companies, that's called like a planning supply chain team. They are looking at the numbers, crunching numbers, predicting what's going to sell, is a very important team at Nykaa.
That's great. I guess Lavish had a question. He raised his hand.
Yeah. Hi, Adwaita. Great insight so far. I had a quick question. So you mentioned that you worked at Bain as well, right? So I wanted to know any key insights or any learnings that you took back from Bain that helped you grow Nykaa to the level it is at.
Yeah, absolutely. I loved Bain. I think what struck me were two things. On a personal level, I think consulting makes you a great problem structurer and communicator. So the way they teach you, like, go into a company, quickly understand what's going wrong, and then put a structure to it, like put a structure to the problem, and put a path to like fixing that problem. So that problem solving, structuring is a great skill that I've carried with me. I think number two is like they teach you how to communicate really well. So because you're obviously serving a client, like the kind of decks, the kind of notes, the way you write, the way you communicate, the way you present, even at that young age, is huge. And again, that's something that I carry with me. And I definitely feel that people with consulting backgrounds, even in the company, they benefit from these two skills: problem structuring and consulting and communicating. And I think on the softer side, I loved the culture at Bain. So I think they've got a very strong culture. They have 3 values. Imagine even now, 13, 12 years later, they're still on my mind, those 3 values. Never let another Bainey fail. Zero defect work, which means like always be flawless in your work. And the last one was to be at cause, which means never complain, but always propose a solution. And so all those 3 values have actually become values that have really influenced Nykaa's values. So we have them in some shape or form in many of our values as well.
Great, thanks a lot.
Yeah. I guess Parth also has a question. You can go ahead, Parth.
Hello. Hi, Adwaita. So I had a question regarding sort of the early days of Nykaa. So when you guys were starting out, you were one of the first companies in India to really pioneer influencer marketing and sort of use it as a hypergrowth tactic. So my question was sort of, what are your thoughts on the value of influencer marketing as a growth strategy, and how do you think it'll shape the future of marketing, especially when compared to alternatives like TV ads or performance marketing?
Yeah, no, so you're right that we were one of the first few folks for influencer marketing. And I think at that time, it was a pretty genius move because not many other people were doing it. And all of us know that influencers and their reach and the way like all of us as customers, we trust what influencers say, it all increased very dramatically. So I think it was a very strong differentiator in our marketing strategy for many years. My honest view right now is that influencers are getting saturated, and my eyes are sort of glazing over what influencers are saying now because they're always promoting something or the other. So I'm getting a little bit worried about, I don't think it's as powerful a tool anymore as I think it used to be. My views on TV and all, I just don't think TV works for the business we're in. I think like promoting more on digital platforms, OTTs, YouTube, Instagram, ads on Facebook, Google, all of that are things that I would focus more on. I think if you're in certain different businesses, TV can work for sure. But I think where our customers sitting, I don't think any of y'all are sitting and putting the TV on, right? So I think TV is not relevant. But I think in a nutshell, if I had to say, I think my strategy on marketing and guidance on marketing is you have to do everything. You got to do a little bit of Facebook, a little bit of Google, a little bit of performance, a little bit of email, a little bit of influencer, PR, events. Everything has to be done. And that's when the surround sound comes and it gives you impact. And if you start getting too attached to measuring the ROI on any one thing, and you're like, I did that event in my building complex, there was no ROI. I did that event at XYZ, there was no ROI. I got the PR done and I was in this magazine, but there was no ROI. That's just not the way to look at it. You do it all together, and there's like a surround sound, there's an echo, there's a chamber that's formed, and I think there's good influence that comes out of it.
I guess that's really a good tip, and I think it'll really help everyone around here. It's just few questions remaining. So, Nykaa was primarily an e-commerce company, but it has also opened a lot of offline stores, and it is also betting big on the rapidly expanding B2B space with its superstore. So, what is it, and like, can you tell us about the same?
Yeah. So I think in terms of physical stores, we started our physical store journey in 2000, I would say 2017 in a big way. And now we're at over 140 stores. I think the insight there was, if you look at the beauty industry, and frankly, if you look at most verticals, beauty, fashion, sportswear, shoes, anywhere between 50 to 90% of those organized markets are still happening offline.
Right.
So something like beauty, only 10-12% is being bought online. 88-90% is still offline. In fashion, it's a little bit lower. Like the ones which have the best online penetration are things like books and electronics. But for fashion and beauty, offline is actually a very important place. So our view was, if we want every Indian woman to think of Nykaa when she thinks beauty, then you can't just be talking to her online. You'll have to have some physical footprint. I think that's actually turned out to be true. So we definitely see that our customers love having our offline stores. We acquire a lot of new customers through offline. Then when they come online, they become bigger spenders. So there's a lot of cross-pollination happening. Some of our more expensive brands do a lot better offline than they do online. And then finally, one of the most important benefits of offline is just mental reach, right? Like physical and mental reach and availability. I think that's a big principle of marketing that I believe in, that if you want your brand to grow, you just have to always be in the customer's mind. And so when you guys are walking around any market, like in Delhi, for example, you should be able to see a Nykaa that reminds you that Nykaa's there, Nykaa's a brand that you love and you care about and you want to shop from. So I think some amount of mental availability. All of that being said, like the Nykaa philosophy is to make money on anything we do. So our stores are profitable and you don't just open stores for brand building.
Okay.
B2B, the superstore business, the distribution business that we just started, that idea is, can we sell beauty products to Kirana stores? Can we sell them to the local beauty store? Can we sell them to the local salon? So typically we were in a B2C business selling to customers, but now can we sell to businesses as well? And I think it's early days, but it's looking promising then.
Yeah. Okay, and last but not the least, I would like to ask you about all the failures and what are the learnings that you took from all the failures in your amazing journey?
So many failures. I think most of my failures, I think like difficult parts of the business don't affect me as much. Like I truly believe that if you pick a good space and it's a decent problem and we're not, curing cancer, we're not building rocket ships, it's not actually very difficult to run these businesses. So I think my biggest failures have been more on the leadership and personal side rather than on business. So on the personal side, I think definitely early years of not being able to handle the stress was a setback. It's something I really struggled with. And I just didn't feel tough enough to be able to handle the lows of entrepreneurship. And in fact, that's why I'm so grateful that I went to HBS, because when I was there, I really developed thicker skin. I think reading about all those businesses, when you read that every company, even the biggest like Coca-Cola and Kodak and Pepsi, have these existential crises, you realize everyone's done it. What am I getting so upset about? Everyone's facing the setback. Why can't I need to get tougher? You stop taking it personally. So I think the early years of not being able to deal with the stress and getting so burnt out is a failure that I went through. And I've worked really, really hard on emerging from that. And I can truly say now that I'm so much more thick-skinned, spiritual, peaceful about the whole journey. It's really important. If one needs to build businesses for 10 years, 20 years, you can't be burnt out. You can't be so stressed out. So that's a big journey that I've personally been on. I think other failures have been more on the leadership side, right? I was thrown into leadership at 22. By 23, I had teams of like 30, 40 people reporting to me. By 25, I had teams of hundreds. I had people who were older than me, much more experienced than me. I think there have been many times where I haven't been a good leader and I haven't been a good manager, just because I didn't have the experience, I didn't have the maturity. And I feel that a lot of people, that was at the expense of a lot of people. I learned how to be a leader at the expense of a lot of people. So I think those were other failures, just not being a good enough manager, not being a good enough leader. But I think the good thing is I'm generally a hyper-aware person. So I know that I was a pretty crappy leader right now, I was a pretty crappy manager. So I tend to reflect, think, fix. I spend a lot of time reflecting and trying to improve, going forward.
And what would be your message to all the young entrepreneurs who are just starting off their businesses, their ideas, who are hesitating to put their ideas out to the market?
So I
because
think
we are still college kids and we don't know that how it would go.
I think my advice is, if you want to build something, entrepreneurship can be a really beautiful, rewarding, and insanely rewarding journey. But you gotta do it knowing that it is going to take a long time and it is going to be the most difficult thing you've ever done. The lows are going to be really, really low. But if you do it with your chin up, resilient, positive, optimistic, insanely hardworking, but again, most importantly, resilient. Nothing pulls you down. Nothing makes you want to stop. And you do it for 10 years. I promise you, at the end of the 10th year, you will have something that you'll be so proud of. Like, time itself unlocks so much value. You just do the same thing again and again and again for 10 years, you'll build something amazing. But if you think you can do this in 2 years, quick, easy exit, easy win, easy build, it's just not possible. So give something time, give it 10 years and be resilient. And I promise at the end of 10 years, you'll have something like that's really compelling.
That's so great. Wise words of advice from you, Adwaita. And it was really great hosting you. I'll open the questions to the audience now. So if anyone has a question, they can raise their hand and can ask their questions. Yes, Aryan, go ahead.
Hey Adwaita, that's really wonderful insights we got from you. So I wanted to know what are your views on like how Indian consumers' taste and psychology differ from Western economies, and how do you think the future of like customer experience would be in the fashion space as we go ahead?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think, yeah, there are like quite a few differences. So the first is like we're just earlier in our consumption journey. So there's less consumption happening. I think the way like an international consumer will buy, how much they'll buy, how many times a year they'll buy, the new categories that they'll try, I think we're just not there. Like, so the Indian consumer is a little bit more early, so you got to graduate them, right? They'll come in to buy a kajal, but then how do you uplift them to a serum, and how do you uplift them to a a mascara? Similarly, in fashion, they'll come to buy simple things, and how do you keep upgrading them is something that I think is an India specific experience. Similarly, I think the US is a lot more ahead when it comes to experimenting with brands and D2C brands. I think India is a little bit behind in that regard. It's growing. We're definitely just starting that journey, but you'll tend to find that customers are a little bit still more attached to like big brands rather than giving new brands a chance. So that is changing. Linked to that, in the US and abroad, you'll see that D2C websites going on to XYZ's own website is a very powerful flow. In India, you'll find that people prefer coming to aggregators, platforms like Nykaa to discover rather than going to, let's say, mamaearth.com. But all of that is starting to change. Then I think obviously India is like a big mobile and app market. So that's another huge difference. Like the US, when we tell brands that 90% of our sales happen on the app, they're just shocked because there for them desktop and mobile are, more than 50, 60%. So that's another big difference. Yeah, I would say those are the differences that I see. But I think one other insight that I have developed is that sometimes we overestimate how different Indian consumers are within India. So you think that only the folks sitting in XYZ big cities are the ones who are passionate and excited about beauty and makeup. It's just not true. Like you can go to, I've traveled a lot of India to open our stores. So you can be in Jalandhar and you can be in, Jamshedpur, and you'll still find women who are more trendy and more excited about fashion and beauty than even sitting in Bombay and Delhi. So sometimes we overestimate the differences via geography, is something that I've noticed.
Thanks a lot.
I think that answered your question, Aryan. Moving on, Lavish, do you have a question? Lavish, are you there? It's okay. Kush, do you have a question?
Yeah. Ma'am, in the beginning of the talk, you said that Nykaa maintains a big industry with 14 centers across the store. But isn't fashion an ever evolving landscape where the trends change continuously? How do you
Yeah.
keep up with that? Like, for example, today some big celeb wedding and the bride wears a Lucknowi chicken curry dress, but you are not prepared for it. And there's a sudden demand.
No, great question. I think you're bang on. When I said that we do 14 warehouses, that's all for the beauty business. In
Okay.
fashion, we don't hold inventory. So in fashion, I just link up with brands' warehouses. So I will not hold Puma. I will not hold Forever New, Forever 21. I'm just listing their products. I'm a marketplace. And then I push the orders to their warehouses when the order comes and they ship.
Okay.
So you're completely right that in in fashion, you don't want to be holding inventory because it is very dangerous. In beauty, it's much less dangerous. Like that same Maybelline Colossal Kajal will sell well for a decade. The same Estee Lauder Night Repair Cream will sell well for a decade. In fashion, you're completely right. Like it shocks me how like trends and products fall off the cliff. One week they're selling 100 units, the next week they're selling 0.
Thank you.
I guess Lavish is back. Lavish, do you
Oh
have a
yeah, yeah.
question?
Hi. Sorry. Yeah, Adwaita, just a quick question, drifting apart from the normal flow. More about you. Is there anything different, or was there anything different that you did back in your college life or at HBS that gave you an extra edge that we should be doing right now as sophomores or maybe third year, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think like I mentioned this towards the beginning, but I do believe like always picking the toughest path possible and available to you is important. So whatever that means in your regard. Um, if it means the toughest path is taking computer science or the toughest path is taking XYZ type of engineering, just take and do what is the most difficult thing is something I believe in. I think it ends up setting you apart. I can't tell you how much the decision of switching from economics to applied math changed my life. Because if I was an economics major, I wouldn't have gotten a job at Bain because there were 500 economics majors. But when you're an applied math major, there's just like 10 of you. So you're a little bit more valuable. So that's very tactical, but I do believe it helps you differentiate yourself. It helps people spot you. And then, of course, it grows you as a person as well because you're doing something so challenging. I think another thing I believe in is like you should be working insanely hard, frankly, when you're in college. I spent a disproportionate amount of time working, studying, I was like in my third year when all my friends were partying, I was sitting and taking my GMAT like for the fourth time because I wanted to go to Harvard. And in the moment, it feels crappy because all your friends are, doing other things. But I think the fast forward 5 years on the line, they were all wishing that they had applied for these programs because it got tougher to get in with time. So in the moment, like hard work and sacrificing some enjoyment seems painful, but really like all of that set me up so well for like a decade. And I didn't have to work as hard later in life if I just because I did that work then. Um, that's that. I think the third thing, like bit contrarian to what I'm saying, is like you should seek out travel experiences and you should seek out new experiences. So yes, you should be studying super hard, but also be able to spot like what are the experiences that your college offers you that are really unique. So like when I was at Yale, I did a lot of travel. Like I went to Africa for one summer. I went to Tanzania and volunteered in microfinance. One summer I went to the Dominican Republic and worked in some commune because my college offered me these opportunities. And I think all of that makes you so much richer. And as you get older, like you just don't get those chances again. And I remember my mom always used to tell me, like, do all this when you're young, you won't get a chance when you're older. And I always used to be like, what are you talking about? Of course I will. And now I'm just 33 and I can tell you that the opportunities to do these things decrease so dramatically, so quickly, that I think back even 5-7 years ago, I wish I had done that. I shouldn't have said no to that opportunity. I shouldn't have said no to that travel experience because really, as you get older, it's quite depressing, but you don't get that chance as much. So seeking out some of those experiences, like you never know being in Tanzania, doing that experience, how it sparks something in your mind about some idea, something. So what I would say is like avoid the mainstream activities, do less of the partying, do less of the socializing, do more of the obviously studies, obviously like setting yourself up for success in the future, but also like do some of this like unique experiences that only your college or like the phase of life you're in allows you. It doesn't even have to be college enabled. Like there's so much cool stuff now that you can just Google and get access to in terms of experiences.
That's so true. I guess these days won't be back.
This pin drop silence. She said, okay, don't party. Who is she?
No,
No.
a quick follow back. Like you mentioned that study hard, but let's say somebody who's interested in more of an entrepreneurial role or is more inclined towards that path, is academics really an important criteria for them?
I guess it doesn't have to be, but I would say then use your time to advance yourself entrepreneurially. So that could mean incubate your idea, like start writing a business plan for what you want to do. It could mean go and talk to 100 entrepreneurs across India and document all their learnings because that's what you're excited about. It could mean taking XYZ classes on, I think there's some cool new program in the US for budding entrepreneurs. Take it virtually, So it doesn't have to be studies, but you should be working your butt off for something and creating work for yourself. That I'm a big believer in creating work for yourself. Like, you want to be an entrepreneur, now set some like tasks for yourself that will make you a better entrepreneur. Like I said, take this course, interview people, write a business plan, set an artificial deadline. I will launch my business by the day I graduate. Like launch, so just make sure you're working hard to some degree.
So true. I guess that's the parents' advice that we all get, that these are the days, work your ass off and just enjoy these days as well.
Totally. I think I worked harder in my Yale than I ever did in my life, and I think it sets you up really well for the future. And you don't ever have to work that hard ever again. Like even now at Nykaa, we work hard, but we never, how hard I worked in those 4 years, I probably never had to do again.
Oh, that really. I think Satvik also has a question.
Yeah, so as we all know that you co-founded Nykaa along with your mom. So are there any pros and or cons of having a family member as a co-founder? Because the way I see it is, let's say you end up disagreeing with your mom for some certain investment decision, but then it's your mom. So how do you convince her? So are there any pros and or cons?
Yeah. Oh, there are so many pros and there are some cons as well. I think pros, like, I feel really lucky. My mom is just an incredible entrepreneur. Like how much I learned from her She teaches me how to take risk. I think a lot of this talk I've spoken about how I was not able to deal with the stress of entrepreneurship. She's the opposite. She's so thick-skinned. She's got like 30 years career behind her. Learned a lot from her in that regard. She makes working with her very easy. Like she from the day I joined 10 years ago when I was 22, she always trusted me. She just believed that I could do things. She never micromanaged me. She never made me feel like a child. She always made me feel like this is your business. You run with it. Didn't breathe down my neck. Even till today, I think that's a defining quality of her. So I think these are a lot of pros. I think another pro of working with family, like stepping back from her personally, but family is just like there's insane trust, right? There's no office politics. You're not wondering, does your boss like you, not like you? Are you going to get promoted, not get promoted? Like she's so incentivized to make sure I have the best possible learnings. And I'm so incentivized to make sure that she has all the support that she needs. And I'm helping as much as I possibly can. So I think incentives are really aligned. Trust is there. And if you are working with a parent or someone who you really respect because of the XYZ reasons I said, it's awesome. I think the cons are that there's no work-life balance. So, particularly in those early years, because she had me, her daughter sitting in the house, she could just at 12 at night be like, hey, can you open your email and do this for me? So there's no work-life balance. I think you go on holidays, like you're ready to switch off, she's not, or she's ready to switch off, you're not, you pass the stress on to each other. So I think families need to define ways of working together. They need to be able to like just set some working boundaries, which we have obviously because now it's been a long time. All of this being said, I think I'm really lucky to have an amazing mother. And now my brother also works with us. He joined us after 10 years in the US at Morgan Stanley. He just joined us a couple of years ago. We all work very well together, but it can also just not work. So I think I'm lucky it's working and we are very active about making it work, but you can also totally envision why family businesses become very stressful. If that trust is not there, if that respect is not there, it becomes too personal, it becomes too intense. You have to be careful, I think, when making that choice.
Okay, so I guess apart from the dinner table business conversations, it has been a convenient journey. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I think apart from dinner conversations, I think, yeah, like realizing like I don't think that my mom can give me great feedback or like that's just not her style. So in many ways, I didn't have necessarily the feedback coming that a young person needs to grow. But I found it in other ways, So I think there are definitely some drawbacks. You don't end up having a very traditional, when you're at Bain, I mean, there's so much structured feedback coming in, structured. So some of that goes amiss, but you gain a lot. I think I've gained a lot more than what I've missed out on.
Right. I get it. Yeah, that answers my question. Thanks.
Yeah.
I think Shubham also has a question.
Hi Adwaita, thank you so much for joining us. My question is related to hard work. So a lot of times when you keep working hard and you still don't get the results, how do you keep on pushing yourself to attain what you have imagined?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think I have two thoughts on this. The first is I really do believe that if you work hard and smart, of course, like, it's not just about working hard. It's also about when we were starting Nykaa, like knowing the right people to call and can you do this for me and can you help me and how do I set this website up? How does the AWS work? Like knowing the right questions to ask, being smart about how you piece things together. I do feel that if you stick to it for long enough, it actually starts working. So that is my philosophy. Like, for example, just being very honest right now, I'm working on fashion. It's a tough journey because, again, there's a lot of competition. But I genuinely believe in our positioning. I believe in the path to profitability. I believe in the economics. And I feel like if we do this well enough for a certain amount of time, it will work. So I don't know. I just somehow believe that hard work does eventually pay off. But sometimes it takes 5 years. Sometimes it takes 10 years. I also feel that, there's hard work never goes to waste, right? Anything you work, you spend your time learning, reading, understanding, working your so hard on changing the way you think, wiring yourself, I think it eventually ends up coming and helping you. So I do believe that it never kind of, you're never losing out. I think the last thing though, slightly contrarian views, of course, I'm aware of people who worked super hard and things haven't worked out. I think I'm lucky that I'm someone for whom it has worked out. So I just want to be cognizant that I can't speak for those experiences where people have felt really disappointed because it really eventually really did not work out. I think then being spiritual and knowing that both one's success and one's failure is a lot more to do with luck and chance and fate than oneself is probably the advice and guidance I would give myself and others.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.
I think we have one last question from Aryan. Aryan?
So on a
Yeah.
tangential note, I had a question. Like you mentioned taking risks. So is there a mental model you use to evaluate risk, like when you switch from Bain to Nykaa, or when starting Nykaa Fashion? Would be delightful if you could share that.
Yeah. You know, Bain to like I told you all that it was just because I had a back pocket insurance policy. I think I have developed more mental models around risk taking in business. So I think in business, my view is that you should be able to build a 5-year business plan, and that plan eventually has to work. So in the 5th year, it has to be the right size, scale, profitability. And if while you're plotting it out on year one, day one, and you can say in 5 years, this is how my business will end up looking, it's going to be X top line, 10% EBITDA, 50% EBITDA, whatever it is. And I'm very confident I can make and build this business to that point. I think if it passes that test, it is a risk worth taking. Does that make sense? So it's sort of like a 5-year business model test. So it can mean that the first 5 years are horrible. It can mean that the top line doesn't come or the bottom line is really bad or whatever. But if you feel and your confidence remains that in the 5th year it will stack up like this, then I think it's a risk worth taking. And I do feel in business like taking risk and adding new businesses and adding new verticals is really, really, really important. I didn't understand that. Like I told you all, when my mom said, why don't we do fashion? I didn't understand that then. I was like, why we're doing got something so good in beauty? Why do we do something else? Now, sitting in year 11, I can see that it is the fashion growth that is growing the business. You guys can look at the last earnings call. You'll see that fashion grew at 50% and beauty grew at 30%. And therefore, now it's starting to make sense. You've got this other growth engine. And in companies, when you're building companies, you need to make sure there are enough growth engines so that's a high growth company for many years. So taking the right risks and adding on the right businesses is actually a really important skill, and you can't get scared and you have to do it. But the mental model, I would say, is the business has to make sense, and you have to be able to visually see that in 5 years it's going to make sense.
Thanks, Lord. Just a quick follow up. Like that covers all the business part, but anything you could suggest for the career or personal basis?
I think that's a tough question. I think I've not really been practicing any risk taking on the personal front. Yeah, I mean, I've sort of been doing the same thing now for many years, right? And like I said, the only one risk I took in my career was moving from Bain to Nykaa, and since then I've been doing the same thing. I think perhaps, no, I'd rather not give you a bad answer. I just don't think I have an answer to that.
Thanks a lot.
Listen, it was a pleasure interacting with all of you, and please feel free to reach out to me if you'll, have any other questions or need any other guidance. I actually really enjoy talking to college students. So with that, thanks a lot, Nidhi, for everything.
Thank you. And with this, we do come to an end for our talk. And ma'am, I would like to thank you for taking time out for this session. It was an absolute delight to host you. And I would also like to thank the audience for joining us. And before we wrap this up, we would be grateful if you could fill out the feedback form. It has been circulated in the chat box, and the recording will be shared later. And with Embryo, we'll always strive to organize more of these talks, and we hope that we have a similar response going ahead. Thank you all for your time, and have a wonderful evening ahead. Thank you, ma'am. It
Thank
was
you.
wonderful.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye-bye.